If you ask me, a truly iconic motorsports event is equal parts great racing and a great storyline. Le Mans certainly has no shortage of these. Take 2011 for example, with one Audi R18 holding off 3 factory Peugeot 908s by itself for over half the race to win by only 13 seconds. Great racing, great storyline. Or even last year's centenary, with Ferrari battling the 5-time defending winners in Toyota to win overall for the first time since 1965. Great racing, great storyline. But perhaps the greatest combination of this came 25 years ago in 1999. On June 12th through the 13th, the most iconic 24 hours of Le Mans of all time. Let's set the stage. Porsche are the 3-time defending winners of the race overall. This year, though, they're absent from the prototype grid for the first time in decades, leaving their former competition, Toyota, Mercedes, BMW, and Nissan, in the hunt. They're joined by the newcomer Audi, entering 4 cars on their Le Mans debut, 2 open cockpit R8Rs, and 2 closed cockpit R8Cs. Also returning is Panos with their new open cockpit LMP1 Roadster, Courage with the new C52 LMP, and an assortment of privateers running cars from BMW, Courage, Ferrari, Lola, and Riley and Scott. I've already explained in a previous video that endurance racing classes in the late 90s were confusing, and maybe that deserves its own video someday. But to keep it simple, there were 2 classes of cars fighting for the overall win in 1999, LMGTP and LMP. Closed cockpit cars in LMGTP and the open top cars in LMP. Both classes were balanced to be competitive with each other on track, both had 90-liter fuel tanks, both had a minimum weight of 900 kilos. Alright, easy enough. And balanced it seemed they would be, with 4 manufacturers taking up the top 5 spots in qualifying. Toyota might have locked out the front row, but it became clear that this race would be a contest of 3 heavyweights: Toyota, Mercedes-Benz, and BMW. All 3 manufacturers were running their cars at the limit, and it didn't take long for the warning shot to go off.
And we've got a car on its roof already. How on earth does this happen? Just trying to spot which car that is.
That's the Schneider. It looks like the... no, I'm sorry, it's not. It's the... it's the
Mark Webber car.
Yes, again.
In the half-hour warm-up session the morning of the race, Mark Webber dramatically flipped his number 4 Mercedes CLR at the end of the Mulsanne straight on the first lap of the session. No video of the crash was ever released, but the pictures that came out of it were shown for decades to come. For Mark, this was the second time in less than 48 hours he went upside down in his Mercedes. During qualifying on Thursday, Webber was on the straightaway between Mulsanne Corner and Indianapolis when his CLR lifted off the ground and flipped in the air. Mercedes were forced to withdraw the number 4 car from the race, leaving only cars number 5 and 6 to start. At the traditional 4 o'clock starting time, the number 1 and 2 Toyotas took off on a confident early lead. On pace, Toyota seemed to be the favorites all week, but they had been the favorites before. 1 year earlier, with an hour and a half left in the race, Toyota held a 45-second lead over the second-place Porsche 911 GT1. It seemed likely that Thierry Boutsen and the number 29 GT1 would bring Toyota their first victory at Le Mans, only the second for a Japanese manufacturer after Mazda in 1991. But a late race gearbox failure handed the win to Porsche for the 16th time, and Toyota went home empty-handed. If Toyota were to turn things around this year, they would need to maintain that pace while proving reliable for the entire 24 hours. Unfortunately for them, Mercedes and BMW didn't appear willing to sit on the sidelines, and the 3 manufacturers traded the lead in the opening hours of the race. A little over 4 hours into the race, Mercedes, BMW, and Toyota still held the top 3, but the first bullet was fired into Toyota's hopes of winning, with the pole-sitting number 1 car needing a gearbox replacement. Closer to the front, Toyota's Thierry Boutsen and Mercedes' Peter Dumbreck were nose to tail in an epic battle for second place. Mercedes had instructed their drivers before the race to avoid slipstreaming the other cars on the fast straights, as this was one of the factors leading to their cars taking flight in the qualifying and warm-up sessions. Dumbreck, in a bid to chase down the race lead, drafted behind the Toyota on the straight leading up to Indianapolis, and the inevitable happened. At north of 190 miles per hour, the number 5 Mercedes CLR violently flipped almost 15 meters in the air and landed in the forest next to the track. Millions of people around the world just saw what Mercedes had feared all week on live TV. In nothing short of a miracle, Dumbreck was uninjured after landing in an open area where trees had recently been cut down. Mercedes-Benz, however, were forced to retire the remaining number 6 CLR immediately. Their garage doors were shut in the faces of the worldwide media, and Mercedes has never returned to Le Mans since. With one of the strongest manufacturers of the race gone, the focus shifted to the battle between BMW and Toyota. When the race went back green, the number 17 BMW and the number 2 Toyota were the only cars remaining on the overall lead lap, with Nissan and Audi putting together a consistent performance so far to close out the top 5. BMW may have held the lead, but Toyota still had the fastest cars on track. and in the nighttime hours, the three GT1s launched a charge towards the overall lead. This relentless pace, though, was not kind to them. A few hours after the dramatic crash from Mercedes, Martin Brundle suffered a high-speed puncture that threw his car into the wall on the Mulsanne Straight. Brundle attempted to crawl the damaged car around the track, but fell short and was forced to retire the number 1 Toyota. A few hours later, Thierry Boutsen was sitting in second place in the number 2 Toyota when he collided with a slower GTS Porsche in the high-speed Dunlop curve. For the second year in a row, Boutsen had seen the Toyota retire from a potentially race-winning position. He was transported to hospital in Paris for broken vertebrae and retired from racing entirely. Halfway through the race, the two factory BMW V12 LMRs were comfortably 1-2, looking for their first overall win at Le Mans as a manufacturer. Audi remarkably had held up with the number 8 R8R to close out the top 3 on their debut, and Toyota now only had one car left in the race, with ground to cover to close in on the lead. As day broke on Sunday, the two BMWs had proven bulletproof amongst the Toyotas and Mercedes. The number 17 in particular, driven by Tom Christensen, JJ Lehto, and Jorg Muller, seemed to have one hand on the trophy already. That was all about to change, as just before noon on Sunday, with a fraction over 4 hours remaining in the race, JJ Lehto's throttle stuck in the number 17 BMW, and he hit the wall in the Porsche curves. The car that had been leading for the last 16 hours, the one that would have given Tom Christensen his second of many Le Mans wins, was out. The number 17's retirement handed the lead over to the second factory BMW, but it also opened one last window of opportunity for the number 3 Toyota, now less than a lap off the lead with less than 4 hours to go. What followed was a maximum push attack from Toyota and a final bid for the race win. Over the next 3 hours, the Toyota reduced the gap down to around a minute and a half off the leading BMW, including a fastest lap of the race nearly 23 hours in for Ukyo Katayama. Disastrously, Toyota once again fell short. After being forced offline by one of the privateer BMW V12 LMs in the first Mulsanne chicane, the left rear tire on the sole remaining Toyota picked up a puncture. And only with an incredible save by Katayama at one of the fastest sections of the track, didn't crash the same way Brundle had earlier. With now less than an hour to go, Toyota's final hope of a Le Mans victory was dashed. BMW would go on to win their first and so far only 24 hours of Le Mans with the number 15 car, driven by Joachim Winkelhock, Pierluigi Martini, and Yannick Dalmas. A result that seemed unlikely for a majority of the race, but one in the true spirit of endurance racing. The number 3 Toyota would take up the second step on the podium, just one lap behind the winners after their trouble. And in a surprise demonstration of reliability, the number 8 Audi R8R brought home third, offering a preview of the domination that Audi were about to unleash at Le Mans for the next decade. So back to the question at hand. This was not a 1999 Le Mans highlights video. I wanted to explain what made this race so iconic. The three-way battle for the overall lead between Toyota, Mercedes, and BMW? Great racing. The charge by the number 3 Toyota to close down the lead on the number 15 BMW? Great racing. But the storylines that came out of this race speak even louder. This was the last Le Mans in this era for BMW, Toyota, and Nissan, the first two going to F1 in the early 2000s. It was the final Le Mans period for Mercedes-Benz, whose PR disaster with the CLR prevented them from ever returning. And it was the first of 18 consecutive podiums for Audi at Le Mans, a streak that would go unbroken until they left prototype racing at the end of 2016. 25 years later, we'll have the largest top class at the 24 Hours of Le Mans since this race. Perhaps this year, we'll see a similar story. Except for maybe this. Thanks for watching.